Okay, so one of the most difficult parts of writing science fiction is figuring out how to launch your book. And what I mean by that is not like promoting or marketing. I just mean, how do we get started? What is a strong opening? So, for example, I'll tell you something that you shouldn't do. Um, Generally speaking, you shouldn't open with an exposition dump, or as we call it in the industry, an info dump. If you open up explaining the world of the story and how it works and that kind of stuff, in a lot of cases, you're going to be considered dry, a little archaic. It is an older storytelling device that has at times been used successfully, but it is one that is largely frowned upon in contemporary era. That being said, there is no correct way to open a story. So instead, what we're going to do is we're going to interest ourselves in examining various different strategies we might take. Each one has its own method for engaging a readership. And one thing I'll say, though, that is very important is each opening communicates crucial things about the story the reader is about to read. The reason why it's so important to consider the opening pages is literally the first page or so, maybe, and we can maybe look further beyond that, but the first page really is where a significant percentage of your reader's opinion about the book they're about to read is formed. Readers in a bookstore, for example, if we're still looking at traditional brick and mortar shopping, will pick up a book off the shelf, they'll read the cover, they'll look at the back copy, and then they may open to the first page if the cover and copy work. Those two things, cover and copy, are less in your control than your opening page. Your opening page is both the first thing your reader sees, and it's also the first thing a publisher, an editor, or an agent would see as well. So basically, you generally have one or two paragraphs to establish a whole lot of different things. And so our goal is going to be to think about ways we can make sure that we're using that space as effectively as possible. Okay, so we're going to start off by considering one of the foundational figures of science fiction. We can go back further. There are people like Jules Verne and H.G. Wells and Edward Abbott who respectively pioneered in the genre with works like 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, War of the Worlds, Flatland, people who took a really innovative and unique approach. But I think Asimov, the 1950s, that's a lot of the place where we really start to see science fiction as its modern genre is expressed really start to crystallize. And so Asimov, of course, established a lot of the core principles. And I will say that while a lot of what he does is considered outdated from a contemporary point of view of craft, it is still absolutely crucial to have read at least a book or two by him in order to sort of understand some of the roots and origins of science fiction, where the genre begins, and what its trajectory is. So, one of Asimov's stories is called Nightfall, and Nightfall is particularly well known, partially because it later on had a film called Pitch Black, inspired by it, but otherwise because it's a really unusual premise examining the way in which the nature of an alien world transforms day-to-day life and the psychology of the people who live in it. So the premise is real simple. On the planet that Nightfall is set, it's called Calgash, and night never falls because of the way the suns of the planet orbit and rotate around it, or the way it rotates around its suns, I should say. It is almost always daytime. There are various levels of daytime. Sometimes there's more intense light. Sometimes it's a lot more faint, but it's always there. And so the people have never known the world to be covered in darkness like we have it here on Earth. However, it is predicted that the planet's motion and the movement of its suns will actually result in a brief period of night. And nobody knows what that night is going to be like, what is going to happen. So, the beginning of the book opens like this. It was a dazzling foresun afternoon. Great golden Onos was high in the west, and little red Dovim was rising fast on the horizon below it. When you looked the other way, you saw the brilliant white points of Tre and Patru bright against the purplish eastern sky. The rolling plains of Calgash's northernmost continent were flooded with wondrous light. The office of Kerleriton 99, director of the Jongler Municipal Psychiatric Institute, had huge windows on every side to display the full magnificence of it all. Shirin 501 of Sero University, who had arrived in Jongler a few hours before at Kerleriton's urgent request, wondered why he wasn't in a better mood. Okay, so let's think about this a moment. What is being set up here? So we get the four sons right in the opening line. So something very core to the larger premise is introduced, and we get this really broad, sweeping tableau, a few sentences that establish the macro level of the planet. We get the backdrop of light on the consonants. We see the four different suns that are being highlighted. Then we move into something specific and focused. We have now something to look at. We have Kerleriton 99, director of the Jongler Municipal Psychiatric Institute. And the name itself that gets introduced is really worth noting. Kerleriton 99, that tells us a lot about the people who live here. They have a name and they have a number. And so, on the one hand, we get the name, so there is some individualism. But using a number also introduces this idea of impersonality or a more sort of objectifying nature of cataloging these people. Then we also immediately see that we're going to be looking at a psychiatric institute. The narrative really kicks into gear in the second paragraph as Shirin 501, a university scholar, enters into the scene. So we have now we have a limited omniscient point of view that we're looking from. This character is now about to interact, and he's assessing and judging the situation, which then launches the scene into motion. We get a lot of things that we can expect here. We get the four sons, we get the exotic vocabulary that comes from their names, we get the sense that this is going to take place on some sort of planetary scale. We know that psychiatry or psychology is going to be central, and also introducing the name and number system tells us a lot about the culture of the people who live there. So there's a lot in a first paragraph and one sentence. Okay, so our next introduction comes from the author Cixin Liu, whose book Three Body Problem is perhaps best recognized as the inspiration for the major Netflix show. Now, that being said, the book itself is a pretty remarkable work and seminal in contemporary science fiction. It has had some substantial influence for the last 20 years, first off in its native language of Chinese, and then in translation here in the Western world. A couple of interesting notes about it is right before the book begins, it opens up with a section title, and the first section of the book is entitled Silent Spring. Now, I can't necessarily speak exactly to Cixin Liu's intentions, but there are major climate and ecological themes. There are themes of extermination and the elimination of species through some sort of poison or toxicity. And the opening segment is called Silent Spring, which also very notably is the title of the beginning of Rachel Carson's highly influential work, Silent Spring, which also plays a major role in the text itself. Silent Spring is about the accumulation of toxins in the soils through the use of pesticides and their gradual ripple effect on the larger ecosystem, gradually leading to first the insects dying and then the birds dying, creating a silent spring. The book was well known to have been the major launching point of why the Environmental Protection Agency was created. So right away, Liu is very efficient in using the literary reference to create a significant portion of his thematics. Then we move to the opening chapter, The Madness Years, China, 1967. The Red Union had been attacking the headquarters of the April 28th Brigade for 2 days. Their red flags fluttered restlessly around the brigade building, like flames yearning for firewood. So something worth noting right away, that's the first paragraph, 2 sentences. we get context. We have this backdrop of conflict and violence, an attack upon the headquarters. We get two factions, the Red Union and the April 28th Brigade. We have a time period of 2 days, so we know that this is going to be a fairly chaotic and a damaged image. And then we get the flags fluttering restlessly around the brigade building like flames yearning for firewood. So not only do the red flags sort of invoke the nationalism of this movement that's taking place, but we also have the menace of approaching fire, of things being burned down or destroyed. Immediately, though, from there, we get the Red Union commander was anxious, though not because of the defenders he faced. So first off, notice how similar this is to Asimov's Nightfall. We have a couple establishing sentences, and then already we are on a character and we are on their interpretation of the events. No time is wasted in setting up a scene. We get a couple sentences that lead us to a broad backdrop that lead us to a focus, and then that focus introduces the human emotional angle. There were more than 200 Red Guards of the April 28th Brigade. The more than 200 guards of the April 28th Brigade were mere greenhorns compared with the veteran Red Guards of the Red Union, which was formed at the start of the Great Proletarian Cultural Revolution in early 1966. The Red Union had been tempered by the tumultuous experience of revolutionary tours around the country and seeing Chairman Mao in the great rallies in Tiananmen Square. But the commander was afraid of the dozen or so iron stoves in the building, filled with explosives and connected to each other by electric detonators. So here we have a much more overt and direct threat of violence now. We had the broad threat from the flags and the fire and the image of a potential fire, but now we have moved into something much more concrete. We have a historical-cultural backdrop being presented with the Chinese Cultural Revolution and references to Mao and Tiananmen Square. So we know a lot about the exigence of this story at this point. We're starting to see what are some larger themes, what is the cultural situation that is going to lead to this narrative occurring. So, like Asimov, Cixin Liu is accomplishing a lot within his opening material. Okay, so the next example we're going to look at is Jeff Vandermeer's Annihilation. Annihilation is the first book in the Southern Reach series. It was until recently a trilogy, but now a fourth book has been launched. Vandermeer's Annihilation is one of the defining pieces of what's often called the New Weird movement in science fiction. It has an emphasis on science fiction premises that are also presented in surreal, dreamlike, or mystery emphasizing ways. Typically speaking, there is an element of oddity or absurdity in these texts that is used to expose larger themes and commentary. Of course, Annihilation is also fairly well known for its film adaptation by screenwriter and director Alex Garland, starring Natalie Portman and Jennifer Jason Leigh. But I will say the book or the movie, while very successful in conveying the tone and mood of Annihilation, has a very significantly different story. The book begins with a chapter called Initiation, which starts, "The tower, which was not supposed to be there, plunges into the earth in a place just before the black pine forest begins to give way to swamp, and then the reeds and wind-gnarled trees of the marsh flats. Beyond the marsh flats and the natural canals lies the ocean, and a little further down the coast, a derelict lighthouse. All of this is part of the country. All of this part of the country had been abandoned for decades for reasons that are not easy to relate. Our expedition was the first to enter Area X for more than 2 years, and much of our predecessors' equipment had rusted, their tents and sheds little more than husks. Looking out over that untroubled landscape, I do not believe any of us could yet see the threats. There were 4 of us, a biologist, an anthropologist, a surveyor, and a psychologist. I was the biologist. Okay, so what's happening here? First off, we have this immediate focus, the tower, which was not supposed to be here. So, Vandermeer right away is dangling a mystery before us. This tower is not supposed to be here. Well, why not? What's wrong with the tower? What's the problem with it being there? Or what was supposed to be there instead? Plunges into the earth. The tower plunges into the earth. Of course, this book immediately establishes a semi surreal tone, and a tower typically does not plunge into the earth, it rises from the earth. And so we have a very unusual presentation of the image. It's the reverse of what we normally think when we think tower. And of course, that's a major theme of the book, taking our normal perceptions and presenting them in new ways. We also have this sort of desolate wilderness, and we get the sense that everything there is starting to decay and be absorbed into it. We see all of the gear left by prior expeditions is slowly being consumed by the environment. It's rusting, it's decaying, and falling apart. But also, perhaps more importantly, we learn that nobody's been sent here for 2 years. We learn that it's called Area X, so that also heightens that sense of mystery. And then finally, we do get this very similar transition from landscape description for much of this opening onto a singular focus. We started with the tower and then we moved to looking out over that untroubled landscape. So we have now moved to perspective. And granted, this is sort of generalized to 4 people. I do not believe any of us could see the threats, but it's written as if it's through one person's eyes. And so we are now in a point of view. We are now looking outward over this landscape from a position where we can clearly see this tower. Finally, we also get the team's introduction here very concise. We learn that they have titles, but it is interesting and noteworthy that we don't get given their names, and we have I am a biologist, or I was the biologist, rather than my name is blank and I am the team biologist. The names of the characters are never given, and so it does leave us in some mystery throughout about what is the identity of these people, or are they simply or is their identity simply defined by their professions? So yeah, again, very similar to the other pieces. Broad sweeping tableau, clear focus, point of view introduced, and we get enough material to introduce tone and theme. Okay, so our next example is Salvation Day by Callie Wallace. Now, Salvation Day works a little bit differently. They include at the beginning what's called a found document. In this case, it is a transcript of a spec security restricted archive document. It is supposed to be a transcript of an audio file. The source is designated as First Snow Spec Transport. So it's worth noting that something that is being introduced here is that we are immediately being given a little bit of world building, meant to create the tone of what kind of world we're in. We get the sense of this sort of documentation of a more formal process of investigation taking place, that we are investigators because we're examining these documents, these artifacts that we have come across. And when we open up the very beginning, it says, First Snow. Can you confirm the ship's identification? Scout 1. Yes, it's Tiger, Commander. It's from House of Wisdom. Lieutenant Nadeau is on tether and approaching the airlock now. So something that's worth seeing here is, in this case, since it is a transcript and it's a transcript reporting unfolding action, we actually have a sub-narrative being given to us at the opening. We can immediately tell that a mysterious ship has been found and that some sort of boarding attempt is being made. First Snow. What do you see, Lieutenant? Scout 2. There's no visible damage. Hull appears intact. Control panel is powered and responsive. System says the airlock is functional and the interior is pressurized, but First Snow. What is it? Scout 2. There's something on the control plant panel. First Snow. Evidence of sabotage? Okay, so notice that, we get a description of the scene where apparently nothing is notably wrong. We have damage reports and things like that, or the hull itself seems to be intact, etc. But we have this immediate sense of suspicion and concern that they are exploring and they notice or they imply that something is off. And the immediate conclusion is evidence of sabotage. It's not evidence of attack. It's not evidence of collision or something along those lines, evidence of malfunction, etc. Evidence of sabotage. Their first thought is that someone human sabotaged this ship. Scout 2, I think it's blood. Scout 1, blood? That doesn't make sense. Intel says there was a virus, bioweapon released by a former crew member. Commander, what aren't they telling us? Okay, so notice here we now get a bigger backdrop. We get this idea that they know there may already have been internal sabotage, and not just like minor sabotage, like a system being damaged or something like that. That a contagion has been released. But more importantly, from the second section, their first conclusion was the ship sabotaged? But then, when they realize that something seems strange about it, that there is evidence that something wrong has happened, the question is, what aren't they telling us? An immediate distrust of the superiors. So we are getting this very suspicious and paranoid future world. We also can ascertain a couple of important things about this, which is the technology level is fairly advanced because we are in a space exploration age, which is actually something we haven't seen in the other examples so far. This one seems to be very directly, this is fairly matter of course. They're not questioning, wow, this ship's out deep, or, look at this technology. It's, this seems like some sort of pretty routine thing that they're flying out. And this is not, now the investigation itself may not be routine. The crisis may not be routine, but this seems to be not something they're directly questioning, that there's a ship out, that there's viral attacks going on. Really, it's a much more focus on the more immediate levels of the conflict. First note, I don't know any more than you do at this stage. We'll learn more when the rescue crews reach the primary target. Proceed with caution, Lieutenant. Scout 2, got it. Moving into airlock, shit, there's more here. Handprints on the control panel, the airlock, the hatch. I'm opening the inner door. Apologize for the language, of course, but that is in the book, and it is not uncommon for science fiction as well. Yeah, we definitely are starting to get the sense of building menace and atmosphere from this opening. There is a lot of tension here meant to draw us in. That's about a paragraph worth of material, just presented in a different format than we've looked at so far. Okay, so our final example here is Caitlin Starling's The Luminous Dead. The Luminous Dead is a little bit different. It takes place on an exoworld, and it takes place in subterranean caverns beneath it. Chapter 1. She'd never gone this deep. Jair wriggled her armored body another centimeter into the crevice, then eased her bag of gear after her. The plating on the back of her calf scraped over the stone, and she winced at the noise. Okay, so here's a couple of things to open up with. So first off, claustrophobia is a major source of tension and anxiety. And from a science fiction point of view, there is a lot of speculation that if we do colonize other planets, there's a high chance that we may well begin subterranean. So this is going to be a common theme we have in a lot of colonization novels. But in this case, we have the emphasis. She'd never gone this deep. That's our opening line. We have tension and we have conflict right from the beginning. Going deep already sounds like it's going to be something dramatic, but we also have the association of deep with depth, of the idea that there's going to be a lot of layered meaning to the piece. Jair wriggled her armored body. So we learn quickly, even though we don't yet know what planet we're on or what's going on, we already know that this is a person who needs to be armored. So there is perceived threat in some form or another. Wriggled her armored body another centimeter into the crevice. Of course, centimeter is an interesting choice because, that does sort of put us on a world influence rather than necessarily an American or British influence. It's worth considering, too, though, that most space exploration uses centimeters and meters and kilometers as opposed to inches, feet, and miles, simply because the mathematics of it is a lot more convenient and more transferable. The plating on the back of her calf scraped over the stone. So we also get the sense that, this isn't just armor, that it's covering her body head to toe. But then also we see And she winced at the noise. Really telling statement there, because now we know she feels like she needs to be quiet, that she wants to be silent. Nobody had warned her that the opening to the lower cave system was so small or empty. So, interesting here that we know that she's been prepared for this journey, but that she feels like she's not been given important information for her own safety. Was so small or empty. To be fair, she hadn't gotten a lot of warning or preparation, so, she is at the same time also kind of on her own. She'd been too eager to get below the surface to question if there should have been more than the limited orientation she'd received. Okay, so we get several things here that we have. She's armored. She feels like she needs to be protected. She's finding things that were not in accordance with what she was told in advance. But that also this whole process is kind of rushed, both by her and because it's a limited orientation by whoever has sent her. Still, when she'd signed up for the expedition, she had assumed three things. And something that's an interesting device right there. So that's going to be multiple sentences, and it's going to carry us beyond the length that I've been exploring for these intro discussions. But what's really notable here is we have a device that is going to pull our reader through the next several steps of the narrative as they get introduced. We've given them a 3-item list, or the expectation of a 3-item list. Each item gets its own short paragraph. So now we have 3 full paragraphs, because most people will read something like a list for completion, figuring that probably the third is going to be the most dramatic. And so I'm going to go ahead and read through these just so you can see the ending point, and then that'll wrap up this discussion. 1, that there would be a team assisting her, monitoring the readings from her suit from afar, pulling up maps for her when possible, and keeping her company in the dwindling light as she left the surface. So 1, she expected people, she is isolated. 2, that she would enter through a giant borehole into a mining camp, and would stage in that camp before pressing deeper into the ground. Contrast against the tight space she's entering into. So she felt like she was led to believe something very different. She expected a mining camp, a place with a lot of supplies, people, etc. And 3, that the amount of money she was being offered would be directly related to the sophistication of the expedition. And yet, here she was, alone, in a tiny crevice in an unknown site, her helmet speakers silent. So there you go. We have a lot of tension established that she's alone on an alien planet in a situation vastly different than what was expected. We also get the sense that not much help is coming for her. Okay, so the final step is to do just a little bit of application. And so for this one, it's going to be real simple. We want to practice writing science fiction openings. Now, I'll point out these can be for books, they can be for short stories, they can be for novellas, novelettes, whatever length we really want. That opening paragraph is typically going to function in a very similar fashion. So here is a couple of core questions to ask. Okay, 1, can I give 2 sentences that describe the broader scene, that give me a sense of the tone of the place? This can be accomplished, as we saw in something like Asimov, or something like Cixin Liu, by giving us a broad, sweeping, generalized description, where Asimov's giving us a whole planet, and Liu is giving us a more specific conflict in progress. Okay, or we can, do something a little more specific, plant us with a character like Annihilation did, or in a situation like Callie Wallace did and Caitlin Starling did. Okay, from there, let's give your reader a focus. So a sentence that does ground us directly into something and also tells us what it is that character is looking at. That is a really essential step for us seating ourselves in the point of view and the character, and then also being able to begin our empathy with the situation. Tell us what they're looking at and how that makes them feel. Or tell us what they're looking at and what human emotion they're observing. It can be something like we see in Starling, where we see the sense of isolation and alienation. It could be like Callie Wallace, where we see the sense of paranoia among the troops, among the rescuers. It can be Jeff Vandermeer's Annihilation, where we have this sense of surreality, where we have these mysteries and questions being dropped in rapid succession. But one way or another, we want to establish a combination of backdrop, focus and character, human emotion, and then finally, we want to bring a sense of conflict. We want there to be a sense within your first paragraph that there is going to be some sort of tension that is going to be explored right from the beginning. All right, so that's your goal. 2 sentences of broad description, one that plants us in the character, another that tells us what they're looking at and gives it some sort of emotional quality. And then in the process, either before, during, or after that, introduce an idea of conflict. It can be paranoia, that there's sabotage and that they haven't been told everything. It can be of violence, like in Six and Lose, Three Body Problem, where we have these troops and this sort of two-sided conflict taking place set upon a violent historical backdrop. We can establish something like that for sure. But we definitely want to make sure we're given that sense of conflict, that something is wrong, and that this story is going to kick into gear steadily. Doesn't have to be rapid. We don't need a gunfight right at the beginning, but we also need something more than, I was born to wealthy parents. I went to school until the age of 16. Things like that aren't going to draw your reader in very effectively. All right, so that's it. Practice writing a couple of those. Do as many as you want, really, because the better you get at launching your narrative, the better reception you're going to have. I'll tell you right now from the editorial point of view, the vast majority of publishing decisions are made very rapidly. If you're writing short stories, you have less than a page to convince your editor that they're going to love reading your whole story. They'll certainly read the whole thing. They're not going to stop at the end of that first page, but they'll have made up their minds in most cases. In a book, you have a little longer, to be fair, but generally speaking, it's still going to have that same principle that you want them to kind of sit up in their seat a moment when they open it, because otherwise, your book is in a pile of 50 other books that they've received that day. You need to stand out. You want it to launch quickly. So these openings are really, really crucial. So take your time with them, practice them, try one after another until you start to feel like you've got a knack for it.